Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Bethany Holt, and I am the director of the Initiative for MPTs, or the IMPT. We are a project of CAMI Health, and we are based at the Public Health Institute. I am joined today by my colleague, Madison Landgren, who is available to provide tech support. I am really delighted that the IMPT is hosting this webinar today on male contraceptives and the potential for male contraceptive MPTs. This is part of our Let's Talk MPTs series, which is sponsored by the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institutes for Health, Child Health and Human Development, or NICHD. This series was launched over 2 years ago to engage experts from diverse disciplines around the globe to help address MPT R&D priorities and gaps, and to ensure the most promising product candidates reach the end users. So it seems like this topic, male contraceptives and male contraceptive MPTs, is quite popular, and we have nearly 120 people registered. So as we are letting people into the Zoom room from across time zones, and we're waiting for people, we invite you to type your name and your affiliation and where you're located into the chat feature. We also want to note that everyone will be muted during the presentation, but then we will open it up to question and answer during the discussion period. But if you do have questions for Steve Kretschmer during his presentation, please use the chat and we can address those too. Also the webinar recording and other related resources are going to be available on the IMPT website soon after the webinar. As we're waiting for people to join, I wanted to mention, we have been hearing from many of our partners that there is interest in connecting. I think with the pandemic, opportunities to connect in person have gone down a bit. So we're really interested in whether there is interest in using this Let's Talk MPTs webinar series format to host more informal discussions or convenings, maybe once or twice a year over Zoom. So these would be sort of more informal discussion chats. So if you are interested in that, please fill in the poll. We'd love your input. So I'm really excited about today's webinar, where we're going to be hearing from Steve Kretschmer about a study that he and his team conducted, looking at the potential demand for male contraceptives and MPTs in different countries around the world, including in lower and middle income countries and upper income countries, namely the US. And then we will have a facilitated discussion as we have in the past, and really look forward to an engaging discussion with you all. So to remind everyone, because I am seeing some new faces as part of this conversation today, which is fantastic. Multi-purpose prevention technologies, or MPTs, are products that are designed to combine the prevention of 2 or more sexual and reproductive health risk into a single product, unintended pregnancies, HIV, and other STIs. The MPT development is complex, and it involves multiple research disciplines, including the traditionally more siloed fields of HIV, other STIs, and contraception. The IMPT, or the Initiative for MPTs, was launched in 2009 as a product-neutral body that aimed to bring together these diverse stakeholders to strategically try to look at ways to advance the field, and then also foster an enabling environment for the successful advancement of MPTs. The primary focus of the MPT development has been to advance the development of these products for adolescent girls and young women to provide more options to address sexual and reproductive health needs. More recently, however, the MPT field has grown to include product candidates that can be used both by men and women, including rectal inserts. So since launching of the IMPT, we've been tracking the MPT pipeline in an online database. Currently, condoms are still the only MPT available on the market, but an array of new MPT product candidates have entered the pipeline, including a diverse array of delivery approaches and targeted indications. As of December of this past year, there were 28 MPT product candidates in the pipeline. The majority of these are in early stages of preclinical or clinical development and are primarily focused on combining anti-HIV drugs and hormonal contraceptives into single products. If you're interested in learning more about what's in the pipeline, you can check out the database at mpts101.org. We are also in the process of our annual update to the database. So if you're aware of MPTs not reflected, please do let us know. So the study findings that we're going to be hearing about today from Steve Kretschmer look at the demand for male contraceptives. And what's really interesting when I first learned about this study was that they suggest a requisite need for the development of male contraceptive MPTs as well. So as you listen to his presentation, please take note of your questions so that you can raise these during the discussion period or post your questions into the chat. So I also encourage you to visit the website of the Male Contraceptive Initiative, or the MCI, great colleagues of ours, and they have a really fantastic website, and you can learn more about what's in development for male contraceptives. So as I said, as in the past, this webinar is recorded and will be posted on the IMPT website. And with that, I am delighted to welcome our featured discussion, Steve Kretschmer. Steve is the founder and CEO of DesireLine. And over the past decade, Steve has shaped the understanding and expectations for global demand for novel male and female contraceptive technologies through envisioning, designing, and leading the contraceptive technology insights research. So Steve, thank you so much and welcome, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Bethany, and Madison as well. Let me share my screen. So this is a set of research, and some of you may have already seen some of these results already. But this is a set of research that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also by Male Contraceptive Initiative. The research originated from the need to update understanding of demand for male contraception globally. And we included the United States in the research in order to reflect the demand within the leading developed market, but particular focus was on understanding demand in low and middle income countries, particularly for the funders. Key questions about demand that have been out there and that this research was designed to address include, do men want additional male contraceptive options beyond withdrawal, and in terms of modern methods of vasectomy and condoms? What additional options do they want? Would women trust them to use the male contraceptives to protect them from pregnancy? What will women do? So would they continue to rely on their own contraception, or will they rely on their partners? What will happen to condom use? So to what degree would male contraceptives that are not MPTs potentially displace, cannibalize condom use, which would be potentially putting people at risk for STIs? And how might male contraceptives provide an entry point to engage men in healthcare, and particularly in LMICs, but even within the United States? The objectives of the research first were to assess latent demand for potential male contraceptive attributes and products, and looking at kind of the next 50 to 30-year development horizon. And this, the main function of this is to inform funding for development decisions, as well as supporting the development community stakeholders in deciding what to develop. We wanted to ensure that we provide population representative results and do so accounting for 50% or more of the family planning unmet need across the LMICs in the United States. We wanted to identify male contraceptive product attributes and attribute clusters, or potential product profiles that are most preferred, and then look at, based on what men want and who wants what, be able to identify and profile segments that are different according to who wants what, shorter acting versus longer acting, certain methods of forms of administration, etc. Then provide user-based demand data as inputs into demand forecasts and impact modeling. So particularly looking at, in this case, displacement of current condom use, for informing where MPT development may need to be developed, and then assess trade-offs that are made by females and males in their method mix. And again, this is looking at who's going to use what eventually. This is important research on the demand side to inform product development decisions, both in funding and in development. If we basically take product development and look at it through two different dimensions, if we look at how easy or difficult it is to develop a product, we can assess different attributes. It may be easier to develop a certain form of administration versus another one. And then the other dimension, if we look at it with regard to customer demand, so, what do men want, which product attributes are more or less demanded. If we were to focus just on the demand, we might focus on what's highlighted in the blue box, these that are high in demand, but not necessarily all easy to develop. If, on the other hand, we don't account for demand and we focus on what's easy to develop, we may be developing products with characteristics that are in less demand. So eventually, when we put them out in the market, they're not going to be used as often. And so accounting for the demand along with the technology required, we can identify kind of what the informed balance would be across the two in order to develop products that can get to market quickly, more easily, with less resources potentially, but also be used once they're in the market. I'm going to quickly cover the research approach and design. I won't focus too much on this, but I think it's important to have a good background on the overall approach. So it was a 40-minute quantitative survey among 2,000 to 3,000 men, and in the LMICs, including their female partners. For the men's survey, it included a discrete choice survey. along with detailed segmentation profile questions. The inclusion criteria for the men were that they're between the ages of 18 and 60 and have had sex with one or more women within the past 12 months. Not have had a vasectomy 5 or more years ago, or able to father children as far as they know, and not have had a partner who's been sterilized more than 5 years ago. We did include those with vasectomy or sterilized partner within 5 years, and they saw slightly different wording where when they were exposed to potential products and product attributes, they were asked what would they have done in order to be able to identify if they would have made a different decision than vasectomy or sterilization if other options had been available. The markets that were included were Côte d'Ivoire, Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, and Nigeria, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and as I mentioned, the United States. The approach that we took was designed to be population representative. So we used primary sampling units and randomly identified in each of the LMIC countries, and we used the North America web panel in the United States. We had 2,000, slightly more than 2,000 men in each of the LMIC countries and 3,000 in the United States. The overview of the design of the male survey, the screener questions for the inclusion criteria, then overall usage and perceptions of contraceptive. This included their perception of what their female partner or partners were using, and we we analyzed that in ways to understand what they perceived, but did not rely necessarily on what the men said. This was an important reason to include the female partners in the LMIC countries in order to be able to understand both sides of the equation, both in terms of an understanding of what's being used now, as well as what would happen later with the introduction of male contraceptives. There was a discrete choice exercise assessing different attributes, characteristics of male contraceptives in development, then fertility norms and beliefs, channels and access, life stage, and demographics. At the start of the research process, what we did is we reached out to as many of the developers as we could identify, was about 30, and talked to them about what they're developing, and with an understanding and a focus on identifying all the different characteristics of those products in development that might fit in kind of the 5 to 30-year horizon. And so this set of attributes and levels were then used for the design of this discrete choice exercise. We have 11 different forms that are tied to time of use, 11 different frequencies, different times of onset, times of reversal, 4 different efficacy levels, and then effects on sex drive, testes size, ejaculation, energy, and weight gain, mood, and whether or not the product would have STI protection or not. An example discrete choice card. So the way that a DCE works is we create a design that mixes and matches those different product attributes into full product profiles based on the set of those attributes. In this case, what we're doing is we're showing a product X. So here's one new product, and then in comparison to product Y, or I don't want either, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. And so we allow them to be able to trade off. And in the back end, when we do the analysis, what we're essentially doing is creating a giant regression equation that provides a coefficient for every different potential attribute level. And now we can interpolate those product profiles that were not shown, what they would generate in terms of demand for that full profile. We can also look at those coefficients and the differentiation between attributes and between different levels within each attribute. So we can look at how much does form drive the choice versus frequency versus time to onset versus time to reversal or efficacy, as well as within form, what's the relative strength of demand for each of the different forms of administration. Outside of the discrete choice experiment, we also tested a number of other potential attributes. So overall side effects and benefits, a set of those, topical gel side effects, administrative side effects, inconvenience, implant removal, and the different mechanisms of action. The female partner survey, basically what we did is in the LMIC countries, we were able to, since we were going face to face, we were able to, following the interview with the man, ask if we could speak with one of their female partners. We would, if they're married or living together, the default would be the partner that is married or living with. Otherwise, we sought out somebody that was within the primary sampling unit. If they were close enough, we could talk to them. Otherwise, they were excluded. We had as low as 44% match in Vietnam and in the upper 80s in some of the other countries. So in most of the cases, we had quite high matching. In Vietnam, for logistical reasons, the connection to the female partners was done telephonically, and so we had a lower matching there versus the other countries. And lastly, in the United States, we were not able to match over to the female partners because of the web-based platform and the difficulty and logistics of doing so. The female partner survey was very similar to the male survey, with the exclusion of the discrete choice experiment design. So I'll start with what we found with regard to demand want additional male contraceptives. So kind of overall demand. One of the questions that we ask with this kind of demand forecasting research is, if a product were available, how soon would you use it? This gives us a sense of kind of the level of urgency or desire for the product beyond just, hey, I'm going to use it, or I say that I'll use it. And it gives us something to use also for discounting overstatement, where within a research context, we'll tend to get people who say that they'll do something, and then when the time actually comes, they don't do it, or some proportion of them don't do it. So this allows us to be able to do that. We see very typically these kinds of curves where you have a set of people who are very interested in a product or have a very high need for a product or service. And so they'll say, yeah, I'm going to use this much earlier. You also have your early adopters who will take it up for various reasons, are more interested, more, lower risk perception, versus those who are later adopters. Let me see what is going to happen with this case and, this product, and I'll watch what happens with others, and then I'll potentially use it or not. Lastly, just to note, so coming into the research, our technical advisory group, a lot of people thought that we were going to see kind of the highest demand in the US. And what's interesting, I think, here is it's actually the lowest across the countries. We see extremely high demand, and in some of the countries that we might not usually expect, like in the case of Nigeria. Looking at these results, reflecting on them, and seeing what we're seeing in some of the other questions, it seems as though in the case of the US, that there's less unmet need versus in some of the other countries. That said, I do want to state that this research was fielded in the US pre-Dobbs decision. So it was fielded in April of 2022, before the Dobbs decision. And we are in the process of looking to field a post-Dobbs refield of the same survey in the US in order to be able to compare pre and post decisions. So we may see a shift in that curve for the US. I'll talk about that more at the end. When we look at what we call source of share, so if we look at current users, couples, and what they're currently using. So the red are those who are using mainly a female, the yellow is using female modern contraceptives. Red is using male contraceptives, which is mainly condoms. It's almost all condoms. And green is those who are not using anything right now, except for maybe traditional methods. And so what we see, first of all, is pretty high potential cannibalization of condom use, so potential switching from condoms. We do see some replacement of female methods, particularly in Bangladesh, but we also see quite high new users. So at the couple level, men saying I would use this, where as a couple, the woman is not currently using anything, nor is a man using a condom. We see especially high levels of that in Nigeria, for example. So what this tells us overall is there is potential to switching occurring between female to male methods. This doesn't tell the whole story because we have the layering or the questions of the female respondents, the partners, as to whether they would in fact give up their female method. But these are this right here is reflecting, here's couples where the female is using a method and the man has demand. So some portion of that yellow may get split between both of them are going to continue to use, or they switch to the man using. And then what we obviously see here is potentially quite a lot of condom cannibalization or overlap if they continue to use both, and especially an opportunity to increase modern contraceptive usage. One of the questions around this demand is, are there differences between those who are married or not married? And what we see is both in terms of ever using or expectation to use within a year. We don't see big differences between whether they're married or living together or not, this was a little surprising to me, but it's interesting then to see that demand is pretty consistent across the board. You'll see the zeros for not married in Bangladesh. For cultural reasons, we only surveyed married men. When we take into account then what that demand looks like and for what, at least in terms of on-demand pill, on-demand dermal gel, a daily pill, a daily dermal gel, a vaso-occlusive hydrogel, or something but none of those, versus never any. I'm never going to use this. When we look at this and account for what that curve looks like in each country in terms of time to uptake, if we were to take and discount very, very heavily, very extremely, this would be the first bar in each country, which is basically saying, if we only include the people who say they would use something within the first 3 months, we're going to exclude everybody else from the demand, then that's that first bar. And you can see in some of these countries, particularly Nigeria and DRC, Cote d'Ivoire to a certain degree, already very high demand across the various products. A better kind of expected value if we were to say, okay, we're going to account for everybody who says within a year, but we're just going to cut it off there. We're going to say anybody who says beyond a year, we're just removing them from the demand so that we're not at that 98% demand level, say in Nigeria. We still end up at, the 76% level of demand in Nigeria at a year. This gives us a pretty good sense of what the demand would be, discounting for the overstatement of answering just within a research setting. What additional male contraceptive options do men want? So this is looking now at the discrete choice experiment results. When we look across all of the main attributes, so form, efficacy, time to onset, STI protection, energy and weight, etc., what you can see is the dominant bar by far 2 or 3 times is form. The form of administration is really dominating the decision making when they are looking at what to consider in that making that choice. Do I want this one or that one or neither of them? They're looking really, closely at what the form of administration is, and then making the rest of the decision based on the other factors. We also see that different other factors are relevant in different countries. You can see efficacy is relatively more important in Vietnam. STI protection shows up in countries where HIV prevalence is relatively high. Other attributes that are kind of relatively more important: energy and weight, testis size, and sex drive in the United States, frequency of dosing in Bangladesh. So there's differences in terms of what's driving the decision making, but form dominates. And this is not surprising for us in the research that we've done multiple times in female contraceptives. We see similar results. And it seems to really come down to the form of administration, which is also tied to kind of the timing of frequency of use, tends to really align to what the underlying need is. How much do I, how frequently do I need to use this? Is it longer acting or shorter acting and on demand? And am I comfortable with how I take it? Is it convenient for me? If we look within form, what we see again is some differentiation across the countries. Gel and pill dominate. I want to point out here, in this case, gel is not the hormonal gel. This is just the form itself of rubbing a gel on my shoulder as a way of administering the product. And we see that that's highest in the African countries, which upon additional looking into it and insights, fits with the higher use of lotions, particularly moisturizer and lotions, both by women and men in the countries. And so it's a convenient approach for what they're already doing. You also see pills are quite desired. In general, what we're seeing is those that are more convenient, easier, less intrusive forms are more desired, and those that are more invasive, less so. Next question is, would women trust men to use male contraceptives to protect them from pregnancy? So first of all, if my partner told me that he was taking a contraceptive, I would believe him. This is coming from the female survey, the female partner survey. And what we see, overall is pretty high levels of trust stated by the female partners. It's a little bit, less in Cote d'Ivoire and Kenya, but overall, I think much higher than we expected. Among the pairs, what do they want? Both want the man to be involved. We see, over half or almost half in most of the countries, again, except for Kenya and Cote d'Ivoire. The female, yellow is the female wants to be involved, but the man doesn't. Man wants to be involved, but the female doesn't want them, or both don't want them. Essentially what we see is overall high concordance looking at the green, But then even the yellow and the orange indicate either side quite high desire for involvement. Looking at communication, I can talk openly with my partner about contraception. So this also gets to kind of, the issues or concerns around, her needing to hide or him needing to hide. But this is the female partner result. So, does she feel that she can openly talk to her partner about contraception? And, by far, that seems to be the case. And then if I were using a female contraceptive, I would keep it a secret from my partner. Again, we see high levels of disagreement with this statement, and so indicating that in general, they're not going to do that. What will women do? Continue using or rely on their partner? So when we look at female versus male demand for a male contraceptive, so willingness to use at some point in the future among men and women, what we see is very high levels across both in terms of, I would want the man to use this, or I as a man would want to use this. We don't see big differences. Then, I want my own contraceptive, regardless of whether my partner is using a method. Here, what we see is, again, pretty high, except for in Bangladesh, pretty high levels of men and women each wanting their contraceptives, which would indicate that for many of the women who are already using a method, again, except in Bangladesh, they're very likely to continue using that method, with the men, kind of layering on their own use of a method. Looking at this comparison between, whether they're married or not married, we see some differences, particularly in Kenya, Vietnam, and the US, but not dramatic differences. Next, looking at what will happen to condom use. So, this gets to the implications. What we did here is we estimated a couple level modern contraceptive use, looking and then condom use and no use. So we broke it down into 3 different groups. So here's a couple that is using modern contraception. And here what we did is, if the female partner said that she's her main method is a female modern contraceptive, we said, okay, that's modern contraceptive method. If the male said that the main method is modern contraceptive method, he says, oh, my female partner is using something, but we didn't have her data. Those cases where we didn't have the female partner data, we trusted his what he said. Otherwise, we relied on the female partner in terms of what she said. We didn't trust what the male said about her use. For condom use, here we focused on the male. If the male said that he's using a method, we focused on that. And then basically everybody else not classified in the first or second category were no modern contraceptive use. The second thing we did, we asked for condom use. We asked the men, to what degree are you using, condoms, and how satisfied are you with them? So you mentioned you're using, following methods, in this case, a condom. How often are you using it? All the time, most of the time, half the time, not often, rarely. And then the satisfaction level. And so what we also did is then group according to some of these combinations. So, always and very satisfied, we considered them to be, probably almost always using a condom, versus not always and very satisfied versus always and not very satisfied versus not always and not very satisfied. We took the very satisfied as kind of the cutoff. If they're not very satisfied, then we question to some degree the extent to which they're using it, even if they say they're using it. We also looked at it in terms of if they say they're using it all the time, we're going to discount that less. Even if they say they're very dissatisfied, they may still be using it. So we have a dynamic discount factor here, but basically looking at condom consistency in use, and in this particular case, to say, okay, if we're really talking about what potential displacement of condoms would be, let's at least take the most extreme case, which is those who say they always using them and say they're very satisfied. What proportion of men does that fit, and what proportion of them say that they would uptake a male contraceptive? So that's going to indicate more likely a potential displacement. This is how it breaks down in terms of the proportion in those 4 categories among condom users. So just among the condom users, always and very satisfied is the light pink at the very top. So we see 33% in the US, but quite a lot smaller proportions in each of the other countries. What we can see across those other countries is the not always and not very satisfied dominate. So if we ask, what's the main method that you're relying on, and they say condom, we need to, be careful about thinking how well they're protected, because, at least in the LMIC countries, the majority of them are indicate that they're not always using them, and they're not very satisfied with using them either. This is looking at then, full view. So those 4 categories, but also stacked on top, on the bottom, no MCP use, and on the top, MCP use, excluding condoms. So vasectomy, and the majority of that, of course, is going to be female contraceptives. And so here, when we are thinking about it through the lens of, well, what might male contraceptive uptake do with regard to improvement in, for example, averting unintended pregnancies? Well, the vast majority of unintended pregnancies are going to come from those who are having sex who are not using a male contraceptive or are not consistently using condoms. Though they say that they're relying on condoms. And so we can see those large bars at the bottom, the gray and the dark red, are indicating that's where modern contraceptive use is not really taking place consistently, and uptake among that group would indicate strong potential increases in couple level modern contraceptive use. If we then go back and do what we did previously, previously what we said is, okay, among everybody, what's that demand look like? If we look at it as just those who say within 3 months I would use it, or within a year I would use it, this is now looking at what those bars look like if we only focus on those who are not using modern contraceptive usage, or those who are not consistently using condoms on the prior criteria. And so here we can see in a good portion of the cases, particularly looking at that 1 year mark, the over half of each of the that target population indicates they're likely to use a male contraceptive, indicating potential high levels of increase in MCPR. Lastly, if we focus in on that group of condom users who are always using and very satisfied, well, what proportion of them indicate that they have demand for one of these male contraceptives, and again, within 3 months or within a year? So that kind of strict criteria. And what we can see, the overall proportion of men who fit that criteria is small. just over 10% in Vietnam and US, and quite low among the others. But what we do see is at that 1 year point, the majority of those indicate that they would use a male contraceptive. It does not indicate that they would not also use a condom. So it's possible that they'll use both, but with that strict criteria of here's the small group who really are we'll call them devout condom users, even among them who say that they're very satisfied, they indicate a desire to use male contraceptives, the majority of them. What are the implications for male MPT development then when we look at all of these results? First, consistent condom use is estimated to be low, accounting for the stated consistency of use and the satisfaction levels. So that provides, kind of potentially more limited than possible MPT protection right now. So to the extent that male contraceptive, we see that the demand for novel male contraceptives is strong. If that male contraceptive is paired with STI protection as an MPT, then potentially you can replace that low consistency of condom use with an MPT that actually protects strongly in both cases. Then, though a fraction of men using condoms are likely doing so very consistently, that always and very satisfied, the majority of those men would uptake use of novel male contraceptives. Again, that doesn't say specifically, we didn't measure it specifically, would be at the expense of using the condom, but it's quite possible. And again, if that male contraceptive is an MPT, then they're much more likely to as well. In the sub-Saharan African geographies with relatively high HIV prevalence, we saw this from the DCE results, Kenya, Nigeria, and Cote d'Ivoire, STI protection is a strong driver of choice for the attributes for novel male contraceptives. And as most novel male contraceptives in early stage development, I would say now is the time, the opportunity to explore the possibilities of developing them into male MPTs rather than waiting until we get too far down the line to try to go and just add something after the fact. Lastly, how might male contraceptives provide an entry point to engagement in healthcare? So, currently, there are a few linkages in LMIC countries, in particular, to engagement in healthcare. Voluntary medical male circumcision is one that is used, but it's a rare exception. It's a single touch point anyways, and it's only really relevant where VMMC, the 16 priority countries for VMMC. There's the potential for male contraceptives to revolutionize access for men. If the demand, is this high, it's an opportunity to actively engage men in pregnancy prevention to reduce unwanted pregnancies, engage adolescent boys in sexual reproductive health education in ways that are actionable for them. They can actually do something about it rather than just know something about it. It's potentially a second and more relevant front to addressing prevention in teen pregnancies, which have actually skyrocketed during COVID in these countries. It's a touch point to engage adolescent boys and young men in gender equity and gender-based violence education. Linkage point to refer men to other relevant healthcare services. And male MPTs could increase HIV and other STI prevention given the strong demand for male contraceptives among men. It also allows us to potentially reimagine FB counseling, ways that we engage couples as a couple rather than focusing just on the women, particularly in these contexts where we know that the men are making the decision or strongly driving the decision making. That decision making now can happen better at the couple level. Lastly, We are looking to refield the research in the US. This would replicate the original work really for one-to-one comparison of results. We're looking to refield in April. The first field work, the first wave was done in April of 2022. So this would be April of 2023 comparison. Made very minor updates to the survey, including things like insurance coverage that was not captured previously. The budget to do this is $150,000. MCI has already stepped up and said that they would co-fund. And so we are seeking a co-funder for any of those out there who can put us in touch with somebody. And we have a note that gives the details that we can share. So I'll stop with that.
Steve, thank you so much. That was such a inspiring presentation, and your data is really compelling. I know there's lots to think about with that. And I know that there are some questions that are in the chat and that you actually compiled some of the pre-form questions too. So maybe, I think you still have those on your slides. Do you want to, maybe we can start with those.
Sure. Yeah, I can flip to those. So, you know, they're having presented this now a number of times, or different parts of this a number of times. Some of the questions that have come up. First was, you know, just what was surprising from the research. I mentioned that, you know, we had a number of people who were thinking or expecting that the U.S. would have the highest level of demand, and that even again was pre-Dobbs' decision. But it was surprising to me to see the extremely high demand in Nigeria, and this is in a context where the MCP use is very low in northern Nigeria. Among some segments of households, it's you know, single digit percentage using modern contraceptives, and so to see just how high that demand is really interesting. I think we have yet to understand why, but you know, there's been a long going narrative of you know, high fertility preference, and so they don't want to use any contraception. This may indicate that it's not about the fertility preference. It might be more about the male control of the decision making. And if you put the control in the man's hands, then modern contraceptives will be used. Now, that may not help in terms of gender equity, but it may be an opportunity to increase modern contraceptive usage and decrease unintended pregnancies, at least. The other one was very high demand for vas-occlusive hydrogel in Bangladesh. We also have yet to understand that fully. What I do know, and we also saw the lowest level of you know, expected continued use by women in Bangladesh. It's a oral contraceptive, female oral contraceptive, you know, hormonal oral contraceptive dominant market for women. I know that they experience significant side effects from previous research that we've done in Bangladesh on female contraceptives. And I've had interviews with men who have said, you know, it tears me apart to see my partner suffering from these side effects. And we really cycle back and forth between her taking the pills and then switching to condoms. And so there seems to be a high unmet need in Bangladesh for men. And for whatever reason, it looks like the vas-occlusive hydrogel seems to be, you know, kind of a long-acting solution for them. The other thing is just to say a daily pill, perceptually, we've seen both for men and women, is viewed as a long-acting, as a LARC, even though we don't necessarily categorize it that way. It's viewed as a long-acting contraceptive, because you're just taking, you know, your dose every day, but you're taking it as long as you need. And so going from a female OCP to a male vas-occlusive may make sense in terms of you know, kind of the balance of the two. And then, you know, this relatively low demand in the US versus LMIC markets. I think it's not too surprising to me, just given that we have in the U.S. Kind of general access to the latest products, even if we have lots of barriers, and particularly for those most vulnerable, and on multiple fronts in terms of cost and access to healthcare and everything else. What are the implications? Yeah,
Maybe,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, oh no, I'm looking at the time, and this is
Sure.
excellent. But we do have a couple questions in the chat, so I thought
Yep.
maybe we could open it up and let Amelia at FHI 360. Would you like to pose your question? I guess you have a couple.
Oh, sure.
Maybe
yeah.
just one of them to start with.
I guess I will, for the first question, I'll stick to, and I wondered how sort of these results are comparing to other population-based surveys, DHS, PMA, both sort of in the sociodemographics and the sample that you were seeing, as well as there's some questions that do overlap between the two, sometimes with a little bit different wording, but the same kind of constructs. And then I guess as you were talking more sort of in depth about the condoms, I was thinking specifically about that, how that compares as well.
Yeah, so we have looked at that, and there are some areas where it's similar, but definitely some areas where it's different, quite different. When we look at the inclusion criteria, and we particularly look at the fact that we're coming at this from the male side rather than the female side, there's kind of major differences. There's also differences in the way in which we are assessing main method. So here we're basically going with what they indicate is their main method. What DHS does is go with whatever they mention as a method that they currently use. Whichever of those methods is most effective, that's considered the main method. And so there are differences in the approach and differences in the results, but we are triangulating those. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And I do know we're going to be wrapping up soon. We can stay on a few more minutes if you can, Steve. The recording will be in the database, so I mean on the website. But with that, Travis, I hand it over to you to ask your question.
Yeah, hi, good to see you again, Steve.
Hey, Travis.
I have a question. So all of this research is done in the context of not having a product on the market. And I'm curious, that is to say these are all sort of hypothetical products. I'm curious how you expect to see these preferences change once products start hitting the market and you have the associated media around it, you have word of mouth, you have people actually using the products themselves, and how those change. I guess another way to ask this question is, what lessons can be learned from the female side of contraception on how these preferences have changed, and what we can do as stakeholders in the field to try and maximize uptake and minimize discontinuation?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to that. One is what can we learn from the female side. The other one is just what can we learn from product marketing and adoption and launch, overall, and particularly in this case within the context of pharmaceuticals. So what we will see is the kind of curve. It may not match exactly the curves that we see, but you will see early adoption and later adoption. Now, what that curve looks like is going to vary very much based on which products are first to market. Right. And this is what we see on the female side. And we see it right now in there's a sister study funded by the Gates Foundation on the female side, looking at 7 new hormonal products that are in development and assessing across some overlapping LMIC markets and some different LMIC markets and the US. In that case, what we're seeing is a huge proportion of women saying, I won't use any of those. The reason why, though, is if you look at it, is for all intents and purposes, the market is already saturated for hormonal longer acting products. The one product that's in development is on-demand pill. On the female side, hormonal on-demand pill. So take emergency contraception, make it Plan B able to be taken more frequently, And in that case, that's got the highest demand because it's meeting an unmet need area. On the male side, I think it really is going to come down to which products hit the market first and what are those full characteristics look like. Our results are driven very heavily by the form. We can dial in, because of what we have from the full DCE results. We can take any of the products that are in development, add the other characteristics around side effects and everything, and then say, here's more likely what this is going to look like. But if it's a vaso-occlusive, right, that is the first to market, you're going to see probably a smaller, slower uptake versus because, again, somebody can already get a vasectomy. In this case, you can reverse it, but it's going to be a smaller overall market versus, say, a daily pill, an on-demand pill. Even the gel on shoulder, even the hormonal gel on shoulder, there it's going to be okay. We see this strong demand for that as a form, but then if we have to dial back because of a longer onset of action, longer offset of action, any potential issues around contamination of female partner, children, that kind of thing, then you'll see maybe some backing off of the demand, which is shown by just the form itself.
Great, thanks. Thanks for the question, Travis. And for those of you that need to leave, thank you to everyone for your participation in this conversation, and Steve for your excellent presentation. We will have this webinar recorded and on the website, in just a couple days. So don't worry if you have to log off right now. That was the plan anyway. But thank you, Steve, for your willingness to stay on. I know we have a couple more questions. So yeah, so I'd like to ask, sort of comment on something that I thought was really interesting in your findings, and that was that even among the committed condom users, there would be, you indicated that there would be a preference for the alternative forms of male contraceptive, and the implications that could have on increasing rates of HIV and other STIs. So I think, to reiterate your point that this is such an important opportunity and time to start looking at male MPTs as the early stages of male contraceptive field is growing. But could you also clarify which STI specifically you looked at in your study?
So we did not actually specifically differentiate on STIs. We had so much that we were trying to capture. We were not able to go into that level of detail. So, there's the opportunity here in a number of areas to follow this up with other research where, based on some of the very specific products that are into later stage development, kind of fuller profile evaluation of those based on what we've learned around things like the interest in STI protection, which particular ones, and that also may vary based on the, what's the epi data for the countries, as well as what's the perceptual data by the users themselves. But unfortunately, we don't have the specifics on that.
Yeah, that's great. And you collected so much data. That's for a future study.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. So I think we have maybe one more question from Maimuna Bota. Would you like to pose your question, or we can read it out loud? I can go ahead. Maybe she's left, but the question was, is there a preference in male populations of the US or LMICs for using short-term male contraceptives versus long-term?
Yeah, so in the research, we did identify kind of on-demand, use it as you need it versus longer acting. So longer acting, both in terms of, you use it and it's working, like a vas-inclusive, or longer acting, like you use it on a daily basis and it's working. And what we do see is, first of all, just across the board, what is desired on the male side is what's desired on the female side, which is a variety of options to meet a variety of needs of a variety of different people. And so on the male side, what we see is a good portion of men who want that on-demand solution, and a good portion of men who want those longer acting methods. So it really is split, but you end up with a lot of men in each of those camps.
Great, thank you. And I'm gonna, Amelia has several great questions. I'm gonna let you, Amelia, ask a final question before we wrap up.
Thank you. And hoping I'm not dominating too much, but definitely very interested in this topic. I was wondering how, and this sort of builds off of Travis's question, how, given all of this information, data can be better collected during the clinical trials for the methods that are under development to really be able to aid in that kind of informed introduction, to be able to, yes, interested in uptake and discontinuation, but also I think most strongly in satisfaction with method and meeting the reproductive needs of the couples.
Yeah, so I think several thoughts on this. One is actually to distinguish between uptake and continuation, right? So we can't measure continuation in research like this, but in the context of a clinical trial, you can, and we do. What we could potentially do in clinical trials that we don't currently do is also capture screening data. If you can, and this may not be feasible, it may be too costly, but if you can recruit in a way that is population projective, right? You're able to actually recruit that way. You could, in your clinical trial, be able to assess, here's the people who would most likely try this product. And then in the context of the trial, you can measure, and here's the people who would continue to use the product. And so by combining those two, you would get for that particular product what the trial would be, as well as what the usage would be. One of the mistakes I think we make when we focus on what's currently collected on the in the clinical trials is we conflate the acceptability as in terms of continued use. Yes, if this product was available, I'd keep using this. We conflate that with overall usage, and usage is what's the proportion who are willing to try it, and then multiply that by the proportion who, once they try it, would continue to use it. That's what usage is going to be. And so we need both of those. What is typically done in the commercial sector is you do a study like this, but with a more specific full profile that you're assessing in terms of demand to measure the trial. Very often that will go into the design of the clinical trial, particularly where it's a pharmaceutical that needs to be prescribed, because you're going to do research with the physicians as well. If this was available, what proportion of them would prescribe it? You can vary in terms of different levels of efficacy, different side effects, etc., and be able to get a good understanding of, okay, we should set our efficacy level at this level in our outcome for this trial. If you set it higher, you risk failing the trial. If you set it lower, you risk not meeting the demand of the physicians or the patients. And so I think accounting for both parts of that can both feed the trial design itself, as well as how the data that you collect in the context of the trial.
Wonderful. Thank you again,
Bethany,
Steve.
One thing I can offer
Sure,
is
yeah.
I'll go through the text. If you send me the recording of the texts, I'll go through the rest of the text, and any questions that I can link to somebody with an email address, I'd be happy to respond. The other thing is anybody who wants to reach out and, you know, talk or discuss, happy to do that as well. So
That's great. Maybe Steve, would you mind putting your email address in the chat then if you're willing to do that?
Yep,
That's very
absolutely.
generous of you. Thank you.
No problem.
So before we wrap up, just as I mentioned before, at the beginning of the webinar, we're interested in knowing if people would like to use this Let's Talk MPTs format for more informal sort of peer conversations, maybe once or twice a year. So if you can respond to the poll. We will have the recording posted in a day or two. And yeah, we really thank everyone for all your contributions, and also for sticking around for the end and for further conversation. So hope you all have a great rest of your week. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.